Hey, why aren't you subscribed? So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about complaints, right? I'm going to complain right now that you're not subscribed. You may have not hit that like button on this video. I'm just kidding. You don't have to do any of those. It's the first time I actually said that on this channel in a very long time because I don't like to tell people what to do. And in fact, my whole message is not about telling people what to do. It's about understanding that nobody should be telling others what to do. So let's understand the idea of complaining, right? Oftentimes when people complain, they might be indirectly saying for somebody to do something. Oftentimes because they don't like what is being offered or what is present, and so they want a change, a difference in the present, right? So they are perhaps angry or dissatisfied or discontent with the current condition, and oftentimes people feel that way for good reason, and it's better they don't suppress it. Now, how they go about in complaining it might affect the circumstance and the change that comes thereafter. How they express that complaint, in particular, what they do with that complaint, right? Because words only have so much power, but they influence the mind, and the mind becomes our actions. That's the dynamic there. People say words don't have impact. Well, everything has impact in life. It's a matter of understanding how and why they do. It's understanding the nature of how such words work, how actions work, how the mind works, how our feedback loops work, how reaction works. And that's often the speak with everything on this channel and everything we talk about with natural law. It's all about reaction because it's cause and effect. It's understanding the effect to our actions and our mindsets and how that manifests in the world. If we're thinking in a good light or a bad light, or one that's based in love or based in fear or based in this and that, it's going to contribute to the world that we live in. So those are the dynamics we understand, and the same thing I talk about when I say unnatural and natural, and my message of nature is the answer, and then you could see the opposite, and you'd see the opposite of nature is the answer as sort of the complaint, right? You'd see, well, okay, man trying to be God, man trying to be nature, or problems with the world that completely ignore our nature or undermine it or denature. So you can see that as a complaint, and I take the overly optimistic point of view into saying, well, this is the good light of things, and if this is the truthful light of things, is it really just good or is it really just truthful? And because it's truthful, it's good, especially in a world of deception where it's creating circumstances that are bad. So it's not that there's a favoritism for good in the world, but that we want good because otherwise we will get hurt from the bad things that are happening. And that's why there is objective differences in morality in nature as governed by natural law that tells you right from wrong. And even people who don't think that they agree to such objective differences, they still do within their own life because they wouldn't purposely do harm to somebody because they know it would likely result in consequences themselves in one way, shape, or form. And when we talk about, especially on this channel, if you're familiar with any of my works, freedom is a very main topic of concern because most of us want freedom in our own lives in one way or another. Sometimes we seek it also in ways that might not actually be productive or in the name of actual freedom, because oftentimes people, especially nowadays, can't really define what freedom is or how they achieve it. So freedom is the consistent theme. Now, what does that have to do with complaining? Well, because there's a difference in the amount of complaints in a free world versus the amount of complaints in a non-free world. Now you might say, well, Corey, what in the world are you talking about? People are always going to complain. Yeah, they will. They will always complain, but the difference is, what is a world that manifests complaints and makes people complain, and what's a world that doesn't? And if you know the answer to this already, I congratulate you, because then you know the psychology and the understanding of the nature of government. If you don't understand the nature of government yet, then you're not going to have a clear answer as to what this is, and the many of other list of reasons in my video 144 proofs that government should not and does not exist. Both. It's a very big mental loop that requires a lot of psychological understanding. So that's why I can get into insecurity, responsibility, freedom, all these things, which are actually just matters of psychology that happens in day-to-day life within our own internal lives, that is expressed externally in systems that we create. Because we are humans with thoughts and complex thoughts and actions of our own, and so we might make complex thoughts and actions and systems based on that, and we express it for many different reasons, as I've described previously in my videos, and especially with the insecurities one. And you may look at forms of projection and image, right? So what you see on social media anyways is a lot of image, right? And what you see on social media too is a lot of complaining. So a lot of these people who know that there's a lot going on in the world and are suffering the consequences are going to likely be the ones who are complaining. And I've been using this analogy lately because I kind of find it hilarious, personally, but also very telling psychologically. But think of a bird on top of a pyramid, and that bird is this ruler, this king, right? Whatever it is, ruler, king, duke or magistrate or whatever you want to call it, president, they're all the same to me. Somebody who presumes they have the moral right to rule over another. They're on top of the pyramid system, and there's somebody below them, right, which may be the law enforcement or whatever. And as you go further down the pyramid, there's more and more poop on these birds' heads because the bird above is the one pooping below. So what do you see at the bottom of that pyramid of birds is a bunch of birds covered in poop. And so they're always complaining to the ones that are above them for saying, well, man, you guys are always giving us poop, you're always giving us this. And it's like we're always having to complain about this, and we're stuck in such a system. It's like we have to just receive it and take it. And so the only thing we feel like we can do sometimes is just complain. Now, first of all, the only thing you can do is not complain, and complaining could actually take you away from the actions you should be taking, and that would actually help free you in reality. When you come to that realization of that complaints as being actually unimportant, but necessary that you express. So necessary that you express for people to know, but unimportant because there needs to be actions based on your complaints that show the alternatives, that show that you're trying to actively get rid of the problems that you see present and toward the positive changes that you want in the world. Thus, like I mentioned, bring positivity in a world of negativity. And I don't consider myself super positive. I talk about a lot of subjects, and I was criticized before, by my family and friends for talking too much about doom and gloom, or seeming like that sometimes because I talk about the world. But when you speak of what is, sometimes to others they might think you're actually complaining, but maybe you actually aren't, and you're just speaking upon what is. And because it might seem bad to them, because it often is, they will take that in a negative light emotionally themselves. But you don't have to take things to such an emotional measure. Take, for example, Mark Passio's approach, because he's a natural law teacher, in using anger. He uses anger in a good way, and he has a presentation about anger and how you can use it in a good way, and how a lot of influential leaders also used anger as a way for inspiring people and realizing the problems that are there. But he uses anger, and it turns off a lot of people. But if they look past the anger and they look at the knowledge for which it stands by itself, then they're looking at what it simply is. And that's the better part of it, because now you're not having the emotional part of the brain take over the analytical part of the brain and really just numb out your analytics into really thinking about what's going on. You're overriding everything with emotions. And you may say a lot of people are driven by emotions nowadays. It's also the easy way out. See, it's more survival, instinctual too, to some degree. And there's nothing wrong with emotions. You don't want an emotionless world. So it's very interesting how that works. If you say, okay, we're in a world where people are driven by their emotions, but also they're feeling less emotional because they're driven more as robots or as a similar thought to one another, what's the dynamic there? The dynamic is that humanity is generally denaturing, and that they are becoming thoughtless, and thus also becoming less emotional, and thus less becoming of all things of their own human nature. All things. Okay, so they will become less emotional, even though they might be driven by emotions. Okay, so what does that tell you? It tells you that there's not much human nature being actually utilized. And for the nature that is being utilized, it is a very irrational nature. And then on the other extreme of that, you have some people who are overly rational. And this is what we refer to as left brain and right brain imbalance. But going to the idea of complaints, because let's face it, going over the brain imbalance is important because people who are left brain might be very scientific, complaining about religion, for example, and people in the right brain might be overly religious, complaining about sciences and the people who don't believe in their religion, for example. And these are just some examples of what certain people complain about. There's always going to be certain crowds of people who complain about certain things. And I'm not here necessarily to talk about that, but rather the manifestation of complaints. And I think this is important when it comes to self-control and actually getting things done. Right? We want a world where, I think ideally most people want a world where things actually get done, and there's not much complaining and people contribute, and there isn't much to complain about. So you have to question, well, what is such a world? And I mentioned, well, a free world is different from a world that isn't free. So what is that dynamic? Well, the free world is actually one with less complaints. Now, let me explain why. It's because you have nobody to complain to. You will complain at times, of course, right? As it only comes necessary naturally. But you're not going to complain to the world all the time and have somebody to complain to because you're dependent on them to fix the problem. See, who's going to build the roads? Who's going to defend me? Who's going to do all this stuff? Well, in the free world, you have no choice but to do it yourself. No choice but to find out how you can do it, and thus there's no time for complaining. There's no room for complaining. There's only time and room for action and doing. And you're obligated to do so by freedom. Not because I said so or because it's my belief or whatever, but because freedom told you so. So if you really love freedom, then you love the idea of responsibility, being in charge of your own life, and not having other people do things for you necessarily. You can still definitely work with people. In fact, it works better in a world of freedom as well because there's freedom. So you have more businesses and people trading, a lot more commerce, just in general, more action. And when there's problems seen, they're actually done more. So when people always complain about potholes in their roads and the roads not being done, well, people actually take that more into their own hands, and they're not afraid to do so because they always push it into somebody's responsibility and saying, well, no, this is theirs and I'm not allowed to touch it, and if I do, I might get in trouble, or whatever excuse they might use. In reality, it's always just us human beings, everyday people, always doing it anyways. And when people crowd fund and they get other people to, fund together different things such as local law enforcement or building roads together and making communities essentially, and truly, being the change, and talk about we the people, that is as close as we the people as we can get, then that's a world of freedom. It's not actually a world of any sort of government. And that's a world of, well, I didn't say the word complaint once. People will complain, but if they complain, they see that something has to get done, and it's something that they will get done, especially if they need it. See, they know that they can't go somewhere without a road, so they need to participate in getting that road done. Somebody who might not need it is not going to want to participate in getting it done. Now, maybe they want to let other people do it. Okay, well, now they have a bad reputation in the neighborhood. Everything is going to have an effect, and it's going to naturally work out, unlike having a third party always step in and make things more complicated, for example, government and all their complex court systems, which are also heavily detached from common law or the understanding of simple crimes, which is that if there's no victim, there's no crime, and understanding simple forms of harm, and understanding what is actually immoral, which is actually a crime. What is something that harms someone's property, violates it? A lot of these things are actually really simple at the end of the day. People will ask questions, well, how did this happen? How does this happen? And in a way, they're sort of complaining to me, like, I can't live in a world with freedom. I'm afraid of a world with freedom. And so this is the question I have, and it's sort of an insecurity that I can't understand within myself. I haven't come to understand it. I haven't done enough thinking about it for myself to come up with the right answer. But if you understood my perspective, you'd understand that it is totally possible. It's not hard to build a flat land. It's not hard to work together and to get anything up and running in society without external control over millions of people by a select few psychopaths who are actually the evil aggregate, in the world, because evil takes the form of which is able to be permitted by deceiving people into such a system. Evil will always exist, good will always exist. What I mean by what I said, because that might have sounded too complex, is that it's a matter of what you choose with your own actions and to what you feed. Are you going to feed evil or are you going to feed good? Right? So evil is not actually inherently evil. It's there for a reason. It teaches us good. Evil is a problem when we give credence to it and allow it to prevail and not realize that it's evil. And that's how we do so. And that's what we've done with statism, and thus the belief in authority or government that people have the moral legitimate right to rule over others. Again, it's a psychological thing that is not easy to understand. So, I totally understand if anyone's confused on that notion. And you can give me complaints, or you could look into the knowledge for yourself and what is there to complain about. You have the perspectives, and thus you not always need the evidence, but rather the perspective, especially if we're looking at universal truths or laws that are present. And there's no need for complaints. There's no room for complaints. What's the purpose of complaints? There's only discussion. This is another thing, right? People say, well, this is a debate. No, it's actually a conversation. You turn to the debate if you purposely want to create fights with people and cause controversy, rather than come to a consensus with people and work together. Don't look at the negative side of things, or the media attracted side of things, or the attention seeking side of things, the egotistic side of things, but rather the simplistic, natural, side of things, which is actually quite positive when you look at the grand scheme of things, as I mentioned, only because we as human beings always ultimately desire it. And all this attention and all this other stuff is really just coping mechanisms for what we really truly want. It's like we truly want freedom, and we seek it in forms that gives us the illusion of freedom or temporary freedom through different forms of insecurity or whatnot. Short-term fixes of image and not long-term fixes of impact. However you want to look at it. There's many dynamics for that as well. But the point is that if you have nobody to complain to, you're going to get it done. And that's what is so beautiful about a free world. And I would like to get your thoughts on this, because I think it's very relevant for the world we live in. A lot of people are very ultra-sensitive and always complaining to others on social media. But are you actually going out there, sharing with people the solutions and finding ways to change things? Because all that time you're using to complain could be time that you could be using to create. So when you realize that you need to contribute and you need to put things into your own hands, you need to be responsible for your own life and well-being, then there is no time for complaints and waiting for others to be the change and pointing the fingers all day long. Because that's the system we do when we have elections, when we have politics, which is a sports game, and we have governments, which are essentially consisting of all those things, but isn't actually really existent. It's a belief system, and it's a mind barrier that closes the heart, because we're not using the heart, and we're simply stuck in the mind. And that's why we actually are suppressing our emotions at the end of the day. Because if we truly love people, we don't want to complain about them. We want to come to a resolution, and we want to work with them as much as possible. And is there time for complaint? Of course there is. And, is that a hard attraction as well? Of course it is, You have to speak your mind, and where you do see there's problems, you have to speak up about it. And that's also beautiful in the free world. People will always freely recommend. There's always going to be unique opinions of individuals. None of that is going anywhere. The difference is no opinions will be pushed and imposed upon other human beings. And that's the only difference. So that is the beauty of what I see in a truly free world, a world without statism, a world without slavery. And you would know that I use these terms in particular, and these ideas in particular, because of the video content that I created. So if you're not familiar with that, I suggest you check it out. I'll put in stuff in the description below in case you're interested for more. And one quick side note, but it's funny to me because if you look at anybody in nature, any wild tribe or group of people who generally live in nature, it's amazing, but it naturally obligates people to be courageous, to take action, to defend themselves, make it easier to stand up to the plate and do so. And thus there's no crazy, mind techniques and classes to attend to. You learn it all in such an environment where it's created for you. And I'm not saying that you should live in nature, but it's just the beauty of what nature can do by itself that goes so always underestimated. And I think that's why we should always look toward possibility. And it's another reason not to complain, especially about the state of the world or your state of existence, and to always see the bigger picture that is present, and that there's much more to life, and there's always more to explore, and it's not always what they tell you that it is, and the world is actually very vast and full of adventure. It's one big journey to always learn more. So is that optimistic, or is that just telling the truth? I think it's just telling things like it is. I mean, is life not one big learning adventure for us all? We're always learning something new every day, especially if we seek to. So let's not complain. Let's put into action, learn, and act. And if you aren't learning, then it is no wonder to me why you might be complaining, because you don't want to learn, and because you lack the knowledge necessary to change things, the only thing you know that to is to complain. Right? And especially, like I said, if you're dependent on other people to do such things for change, then your only option that you know of is to complain. And the only other option that you know of is what the system tells you to do, which is perhaps just vote or participate in their systems, which allow you to also complain in different ways. Right? Instead of doing things actively for yourself, which you might say, oh, is super hard to do, but it isn't when you actually do it, and you make it daily practice, especially if it should be. And you help other people do the same as well. It's also important to note that in a free world, you can make the right complaints as well, being that there isn't any censorship present, or at least not as much, because there's a diverse media and diverse peoples, and everyone's sharing each other's things. It's very freely social. And going back to the first complaint in the very beginning of this podcast, when I complain, oh my gosh, please sub, and like I was just joking around, right? But think about it. If you are more content in a free world, then you wouldn't really want those things anyways either. A lot of people nowadays are looking for greed and all these material things, and they're not looking at the value of life itself, and there's less understanding the fruits of your labor, and thus becoming content because you're working for everything that you're getting. So this all contributes in a free world, and I think it's important for us all to understand. Thank you. This is Corey from Ninjalot. Do not complain. Go out there, create action, create change, create impact, and if you need extra help, check out my website, which I create for everybody. The movement, nature is the answer, because I believe that is so, and I think a lot of people know so intuitively as well. It goes along the ideas of natural law, natural health, these self-evident truths. Your contribution is you joining. You don't have to sign anything or give your signature or whatever. Okay? It's all up to you. You can customize materials. whatever's going to help you create the change you need in the world, so we can create that free world, so people can be naturally obligated to create action, so they can take care of their families, so they can do all these things that are naturally supposed to be in place but aren't in place necessarily today. If you want that world to be made possible, these small efforts of you creating change in the world will make it possible, especially over time, with thousands and thousands of more people doing it. More and more, we can eventually change the world. Thank you. This is Corey Angelat. Nature is the answer. Check out the website nita.one. Thank you.